All right. Well, we want to talk a little bit about what Tesla's been doing lately, which is with their full self-driving. Now, full self-driving in air quotes, because this has been a constant theme of like, all right, coming soon, more people will have access to this beta of a feature that maybe almost works. Right. And you've spoken at length about this on Twitter, which I love. Probably since like 2015, I've been paying, or at least in the cars that I bought, paying for full self-driving. I've paid extra for this, and it's finally arrived at this very interesting stage, which is it is in beta, but you have to request access to the queue that can start using the beta. Yeah. And once you request access, you update the app, you update the software on your car, and then it begins tracking how you drive and assessing a safety score. And those with the highest safety score will be the first in line to start using the feature that they paid for already.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to break down. Yeah. First of all, you know, the history of like having paid for self-driving a long time ago and still not having access to it. How does that feel? Have you paid for self-driving before? And are you a person interested in it?
Yeah. I mean, Tesla's kind of changed the way that they've done this multiple times now, at least in the US. This is still different in Europe, but now there's only one option. So it's either everything or nothing, and that all falls under the full self-driving umbrella, which costs $10,000 or $200 a month, which is a lot of money. Yeah. And then when I bought my car, and presumably when you bought your cars, there were two different packages. One was called Enhanced Autopilot and one was called Full Self-Driving. And Enhanced Autopilot, that basically has all of the features that Teslas can do today. So the automatic lane changes, the hopping on and off the highway, and then the full self-driving package didn't really get any features until a couple years ago when Smart Summon came out, where it could drive around the parking lot. And then more recently, it will now stop at traffic lights. But other than that, full self-driving doesn't really do anything yet for the average person. And there's a lot of people that have been agitated, as you mentioned, because since 2015, they've been selling this as a software feature. And they've kind of been promising. I mean, if you get into the fine print, they're probably not liable. But make no mistake, I mean, they've been saying for years that this is pretty much done. And it's not. And so there's a lot of people that are really frustrated because they've been waiting years for something that hasn't come. Some people, like you, have sold cars and purchased new ones without ever getting value out of the full self-driving package. And then the worst part of all, and this is the part that makes me mad for other people, is there's people that leased Teslas that paid money for full self-driving on their lease, returned their car, and never realized value for any of that because it just never happened. And actually, you leased your first Model S, right?
Right. Yeah. And I did pay extra for it. And as you think about these businesses, it's not like businesses get to be successful without thinking really hard about like the bottom line and like average value you get out of a car. It's like they know what they're doing clearly. Oh yeah. And the more, Tesla might not have ads or marketing the way traditional manufacturers do, but at least people in the company sharing that it seems feature complete, and it's clearly getting people to spend a bit more on the cars despite not getting actually more out of the car, which is a weird thing to say about a car in the software department. Yeah. But now we're, despite all the tweets about like, 3 weeks away, it's 1 week away, whatever, there's finally a button and you can finally request it now.
It's real.
Now there's been a very, very limited beta of this full self-driving out there in the world. Mm-hmm. And there's a small group of people who's actually gotten to use it and have made YouTube videos about it and have had like a little GoPro behind the dash cam of the wheel, like showing what's going on in the car. Have you seen any of these videos of it in action?
Yeah.
What do you think of these
channels?
Videos?
There's a channel in particular, I think it's AI Driver. Whoever runs the channel does an excellent job because they'll like superimpose what the car is seeing in the visualization as they're driving. I mean, there's a bunch of people that are really creative about how do we show what the car sees and how do we show what it actually does. And so, I mean, and the videos are impressive. I mean, the car does drive itself a lot of the time, which is pretty cool. It's certainly not bulletproof. And that's where we get into the kind of endless discussion of, well, where do we draw the line of what do we consider, safe enough that it can kind of take over, or what are the edge cases? But I got to hand them props. It's a real product, kind of, even though not everyone has access to it. It's more impressive than what anyone else is doing, other than maybe Waymo, but that's a whole different technology stack and different thing.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah. No, I've been following it because I paid for it, and now I'm like, all right, I'm ready. Like, let me get in the beta. Let me see what this is about. Because right now we did our 1,000-mile road test, and that's the most I've ever used autopilot. And I was constantly like very aware of when it would disengage, and getting to the exit on a highway, it would get like halfway down the exit ramp. It would count down 500 feet before I disengage, 200 feet before I disengage, and then it would go, all right, I'm done. You take the wheel. And so funny. I see all these videos of people using the full self-driving beta. It's taking turns across traffic. It's stopping at stoplights, merging with all these complicated ramps and all these things. And I'm like, all right, that's pretty impressive. But there is a solid amount of correction happening when I'll see like some weird, lines on the road or a bus stop or a curb or something weird comes up, and they'll go, oh, this was a little weird. I'll just take the wheel and then re-engage it in a second.
Big time.
And I feel like the metric that they land on the most is how many times do I have to disengage it before I get to my destination? Right. And that number is shrinking and shrinking, and hopefully it's the safest when there's 0.
Right. And I think that's maybe why Tesla's been so cautious about this rollout, is obviously they don't want the negative kind of press and the liability of having their full self-driving software crash when someone who's not paying attention is behind the wheel. But it is going to take a while, because even though the disengagements are low, I mean, I don't know the percentage of miles driven to disengagements occurring, but I'd bet it's probably 90, maybe 95% that the car does it by itself, which is really good. But if you go back years and years and years, that's when Elon's saying, 99% is super easy. It's when you get 99.99999 and you add the nines. And I think he's always said that they need to get to 3.9s before it's good enough. And I mean, they're not even close to 99 right now. But that's why they're doing this, right? Because they need to gather data, and the more people driving with the software, the more disengagements that happen, the more the system can analyze what went wrong and how will I fix that in the future. So it's working theoretically. So do you have access? What's your safety score?
Well, that's where I'm going. So your point about like them being super careful about who gets access to it and who gets to use it, because obviously any mistakes it makes are just going to get picked up and probably make headlines. Right. So I didn't have access to that early beta. And there's even some notes about like, apparently people who are in that super early small group had to sign a special NDA and only be able to share certain things. And that doesn't look great. But now that it's out there, I figured I'd put myself in the queue. I have a safety score. It's not high enough. I'll put it that way.
Come on, tell us, what is it?
It started at like 95. I believe it's currently at 77, which is not great. That would be C plus.
Yeah,
C
you're
plus.
Passing, right? That gets you a degree.
Passing.
Maybe not a degree in full self-driving.
No. But the idea here is like, all right, so the safer you are as a driver, then the more likely you are to be admitted into this program to test this full self-driving. So I'm like, all right, I guess that does make sense. But then you can actually look through and see exactly how it's evaluating your safety score. Do you have a safety score?
I don't, because on my Model Y, I didn't actually end up paying for full self-driving.
Oh, okay.
So
there are 5 things that it's looking at to determine your safety score, and it's basically a proportion of how many dangerous things happen over like per 1,000 miles.
Sure.
The first one is how many forward collision warnings do you get? The second one is how much hard braking do you do? And hard braking is an excess of 0.3 Gs. So, diminishing your vehicle's speed by 6.7 miles an hour in 1 second. It's decently hard braking.
I feel like autopilot frequently does hard braking.
I was going to say that, all the time. I feel like I'll just get phantom braking that hard. Aggressive turning. So lateral G is greater than 0.4.
So fun driving.
Fun driving,
Yeah, right.
Unsafe following distance. So anytime you're over 50 miles an hour and your vehicle's headway is less than 1 second between the guy in front of you.
Good, yeah.
And how many forced autopilot disengagements do you have? So if you don't touch the wheel after 30 seconds of it bleeping at you, it'll disengage autopilot, and that will ding your score. Turns out most of my score dings are for unsafe following, which I if you're just on the highway going highway speed, you should be further technically from the car in front of you.
But, and this is where I think these scores are problematic a little bit, is that's based on what the car perceives to be accurate based on its kind of what it's looking for, right? But like if you're in New York, your traffic is going to be a lot different than if you're in rural Kansas. And
100%.
so the car might think this is not as safe, when in reality, that might be safe driving for where you are.
Yeah. But yeah, I've seen some videos have come up of like specifically things where you can make a decision in real time that would be less safe, that would give you a higher safety score. So for example, you're coming up on a stop sign and you realize at the last second you have to stop. Do you just roll through the stop sign, or you slam on the brakes and get a ding safety score? But technically that was safer. Or I think someone else is saying like, you know, some things roll out in front of your car. Do you just steamroll over them because the car doesn't think about collisions or acceleration at all versus hitting the brakes? The one I found interesting was like, if someone just cuts you off or hits the brakes in front of you, that's going to ding your close following distance and your hard braking immediately.
And that's not your fault, right?
And it's not your fault. And you were being safe about it because you hit the brakes to not hit them.
Right,
Exactly. So it's weird that the car is like making these decisions and doesn't have much context about them. How do you think your safety score would be if you had it turned on right now? Would you perform for the algorithm, or would you just drive like however you want?
Well, I would probably perform for the algorithm because ultimately I'd want to make a video about it. But yeah, I think I would be probably more conscious of how I was driving to hit the score that I wanted, that I would actually probably be driving less safely. And that's where I think, not that I have major criticisms with the idea, but I think they should set a minimum threshold and then kind of roll stuff out based on where people are in the order queue or whatever. I mean, because again, you have people that have purchased this 5 years ago, and if they've got a 94% safety score and they're starting with everyone who's 100, and then after a couple months 99, and then after a couple months 98, you know, that's going to be tricky and frustrating to those people that feel like they should get access. So I would prefer they, you know, say, okay, 90% is the minimum safety score. If you've got that, then you get access to the beta, and then we're going to watch you. And we have the cabin camera turned on, and if you're not paying attention, and if there's disengagements, and if you're looking down at your phone, then you're in trouble. But arbitrarily getting people to hit this maximum number that, again, is kind of based off on how to game the algorithm rather than how to actually just drive safely seems a bit ill-advised, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's also kind of funny that you've already paid for this thing. And it seems like it's finally ready because it's actually shipping to real people via software update, and you still don't get it because now you have to try out again for the thing you already bought.
Yep.
That is a little bit weird to me, but I think even more weird is the fact that the car is now, it's already known how I drive, but it hasn't necessarily relayed that information back to people who will make a decision based on it. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's another level of like weird borderline, not surveillance, but it's like a strange extra layer of information to give up to people.
Yeah, no, it kind of is. And I guess Tesla's approach would be, well, that's just the clause of the beta. You don't have to join the beta. If you want to just wait until it hits public release and you never have to touch the steering wheel and you never have to disengage, knock yourself out. But that's going to take a long time. It's going to be years, presumably, before you can sit in your car and not pay attention and you don't look at the wheel and you're watching Netflix, because based on what we're seeing, it's going to be a long time before you can truly take your eyes off the wheel. And that's where I think Tesla, actually, I got to give them credit, because I've been pretty critical about how they have been pitching autopilot and full self-driving, because I think they oversell the capabilities of the system. But this really cautious rollout, I think, is smart, because as soon as you provide people with any level of autonomy, no matter how good of a driver they are, they're going to think they understand the system. They're going to think they know when disengagements aren't going to happen, and you just instinctively pay less attention. And I noticed that in autopilot. I mean, I like to think I'm a good driver. I don't use my phone when I'm driving, but there have been times when I would be like, you know what? I'm driving and I'm on the freeway going 80 miles an hour, and I don't really remember the last time I looked like super far ahead to see, you know, if there's people beside me, because you kind of just zone out looking at the road. And so this cautious rollout to make sure that the people that are driving with the full self-driving beta are actually ready to take control is good. It's just frustrating that this is part of a, hey, so you gave us thousands and thousands of dollars years ago, and now we're slowly, maybe, perhaps going to give you access.
Thanks for watching this clip. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. No safety score required, so it's pretty easy.
But it will cost you money. And you won't get to use it for another 5 years because it'll be at the bottom of the queue. No, for real, it's free. The subscribe button's free. The like button is also free. Shout out to those buttons. We appreciate that on YouTube. And be sure to get, well, I said that already. Subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.
Use Marques's angle for that.